Hello, ladies, gentlemen, and my non-binary friends. Buenos dias. I am Professor Gustavo Rojo Iguana, and today we're talking about character. A character is a fictional representation of a person. It is usually an attempt at a psychologically realistic representation. This means readers, viewers, players can usually understand why the person does what they do as they move through the plot of the story. The words usually and often will come up a lot in this video and in all of these videos because of the way art evolves. Anytime someone attempts to define a type of art, a genre for example, they say this genre has X, Y, and Z features. But then someone else comes along and says, you know, I could make something that has X and Z but not Y. They may make a successful work like that, or they may not, but other people will try as well. And eventually someone will succeed. Art pushes boundaries and evolves in this way. So, instead of being forced to create new definitions for the genre every time that happens, we recognize that it's true that most of the time the genre contains X, Y, and Z, but sometimes works in that genre don't contain all of them. When we talk about character development, we could be talking about one of two things. Either we are talking about a writer developing a character by giving us information about them, or we are talking about the character developing as a person, growing as they progress through the story. So when we call someone a well-developed character, we could be saying that we know enough about them to understand why they do what they do, or we could be saying the way that they change throughout the story is believable and compelling. There are many things we can learn about the character.
Personality traits.
Physical appearance.
Feelings.
Beliefs.
Attitudes.
And there are different ways to learn about a character. We can learn about them through their actions.
Do they shoot first and ask questions later? Do they smile and approach with open arms? Do they ask questions first? Do they shoot first, shoot later, shoot some more, and ask a question or two once everybody's dead?
You can learn about them through their reactions
to situations. What do they do when they learn that their father has died? What do they do when they are captured and thrown in a cell? What do they do when you get the idea?
You can learn about them through their reactions
to other characters. Do they sneer when someone walks into the room? Do they shudder at the thought of talking to a specific person? Do they have good reason to? Or is it some bigotry or bias that they need to overcome?
You can learn about them through their physical appearance.
Oh, this one's important because for a long time, the English-speaking world believed that physical appearance was indicative of a person's moral fiber. They literally believed that attractive people were more trustworthy and morally good people, and that any physical deformity was basically a warning sign from God. And this is a myth that is still perpetuated in fiction. Just look at Scar in The Lion King, but is also frowned upon.
You can learn about them through their speech.
Accents can tell you where they're from. The level of formality can tell you their education or socioeconomic status. Specific word choices can tell you how they feel about the person they're talking to.
You can learn about them through their gestures.
Body language can convey emotion, but physical movements can highlight certain aspects of a character as well. There's a scene in one of the first James Bond movies where people are playing cards, and one hand is finished, someone asks who Bond is. Bond takes out a cigarette and a lighter, lights the cigarette, takes a drag and says,
Bond. James Bond.
All of this physical action before answering the question, you see, conveys a sense of confidence. He doesn't need to answer your questions, and if he does, he'll do it when he's damned good and ready.
Or you can learn about them through their names.
Their names. In the Terminator series, the savior of mankind is John Connor. It is not a coincidence that his initials are JC. John Carter of Mars, created by Edgar Rice Burroughs, is another savior with the initials JC. Of course, he's saving Martians, but from the Martian perspective, John Carter came to them from another world, and he actually has otherworldly powers. And in a way, the same is true of another famous Edgar Rice Burroughs character. Tarzan has a foot in two worlds, and he has superpowers in both of them. In the animal world, he has super intelligence. In the human world, he has super strength and agility. And for some reason, he can learn whole languages in a few days. I guess he has super intelligence in the human world as well. I don't know what that's about. But when Tarzan goes back to Europe and finds out who his parents were, he learns that his given name at birth was John Clayton. Another way to Jesus up your character is to make their last name Shepherd, because Jesus was known as a shepherd. Like Jack Shepherd from the TV show Lost, who, by the way, had a father named Christian Shepherd. Carpenter is another one. In the original The Day the Earth Stood Still, the alien who has come to save humanity takes the name Mr. Carpenter. And that is, of course, because Jesus, or at the very least Joseph, was a carpenter.
There are two ways that information about a character is conveyed. The author can tell you about them. Physical appearance has to be described. Or you can infer things about them from the things that they say and do. Emotions can be described or expressed. If one character starts cursing at another character, you can tell that they are angry. Or the author could simply write, Michelle was very upset. Most of what we are going to be doing here is figuring out which characters belong in which categories. Some of these categories are mutually exclusive and some are not. You can have round characters who are dynamic, or you can have flat characters who are dynamic. But you can't have round characters who are flat. However, it is better to think of these as spectrums. One character may be round compared to another character, but they might not be as rounded out as a third character. And now, here is Professor Mansica to explain the difference between round and flat characters.
Thanks, Gus. William Forrester classified characters into either round or flat. A round character is a complex character that we know a lot about. A flat character is either a simple character or a character that we don't know that much about. And these are relative terms. In some stories, we don't need to know a lot about a character. Do we know enough about them to understand the choices that they make? Do we know enough about them to understand why we like or dislike them? Then you can call that a round character, even if we don't know that they were born on a rainy night in Colorado and their favorite cereal is Lucky Charms. It's important to note, though, that flat characters aren't necessarily a bad thing. Usually, you don't want to have flat major characters, but minor characters are people that we don't spend a lot of time with. Sometimes, it's cool when minor characters are really fleshed out and could be described as round, but it's not necessary. If your main character goes to the store, we don't need to know everything about the guy who held the door open for her. And keeping track of a million different backstories can get frustrating. I'm going to throw it to Mrs. Prima to explain the difference between static and dynamic characters.
Thank you, Professor. A static character is a character that does not change throughout the story. Think stationary. They stay the same. A dynamic character is one who does learn and grow and change through the events of the story. It's very common to have main characters be dynamic characters, and often villains are static characters. But static main characters aren't necessarily bad. There are two ways to make a story work really well with a static main character. The first is to make the story a tragedy. I can't think of any good examples. The only thing coming to mind is the movie Krisha, but most people have never heard of it, let alone seen it. However, it's sad when a person cannot change, and then they suffer consequences because of it. The other way to make a good story with a static main character is to have the world change to suit the character. You can see this in the Paddington Bear movies. Paddington is an optimistic, polite little bear in a cynical world. But by interacting with the people in that world, they start to lose their cynicism and become more polite and optimistic. You can see the same thing in Disney's Wall-E. Everything Wall-E comes into contact with becomes more human, including the actual humans that he meets. One final note for me, then I'll throw it to... What are we calling this character? Pirate Rick?
Renaissance Rick.
Renaissance Rick. Okay, whatever. Be sure not to confuse a character with a dynamic personality for a dynamic character. In Fight Club, Tyler Durden has a dynamic personality. He's bold, intense at times, and relaxed at others, and he's willing to punch somebody in the face or take a punch if it'll get him what he wants. But Tyler Durden never changes. By the end of the story, he's still living by the same philosophy and pursuing the same goal that he was at the beginning of the story. That's the very definition of a static character. Okay, take it away, Renaissance Rick.
Thank you, Mrs. Prima. A foil is a character that contrasts sharply with another character. Usually it's a side character that is there to contrast with a major character. The purpose of this is to highlight a specific feature in the major character. They don't have to be complete opposites. They can be relatively similar, but they have one or two aspects of their personality that differ greatly. This is easiest to recognize with heroes and villains. That's why I've included a picture of the terror that flaps in the night, Darkwing Duck, and his nemesis, Negaduck. Darkwing fights crime out of a sense of duty, but also out of a sense of ego. He'll always do the right thing, but he wants people to know that he did the right thing. On the other hand, Negaduck commits crimes, and he does it for profit, and because he enjoys making people miserable. Sometimes he does things out of ego, but that's just because different writers have different ideas for what he should do or be in different episodes. Most of the time he steals stuff, or he breaks stuff, and then he goes off to enjoy his money or the newly acquired weapon. Now, as mentioned earlier, the whole point of a foil is to highlight one or more traits in one of your major characters. The new DuckTales cartoon is a perfect example. If you know anything about Scrooge McDuck, you know that he's rich, he's cheap, and he travels the world seeking adventure. And Disney has worked pretty hard to make viewers understand that Scrooge isn't just cheap. He's just rather responsible. He understands the value of $1. The nephews now serve as foils to Scrooge. If you're familiar with the old cartoon, they were basically the same character in 3 bodies. They always agreed with and supported each other. They'd finish each other's sentences, so that if you were talking to one of them, it was the same as talking to all of them. But that is not how the new DuckTales do. In this version, they have different personalities that highlight different aspects of Scrooge's character. Huey, the one wearing red, is the responsible one. He likes to study, make plans and work hard. But he differs from Scrooge in that he's too attached to his books and plans. When things don't go according to plan, Huey has a hard time adapting. Scrooge, on the other hand, can roll with the punches. He even gets excited sometimes when something happens and everything becomes more challenging. This brings us to Dewey, the one wearing blue. He is the adventurous one. He throws himself into the action, and this highlights Scrooge's adventurous side. But Scrooge's adventurous side is also balanced out by his willingness to study, to plan, and make calculated moves. And then, of course, we have Louie. Louie is the one in green, and he wants to be rich, but he's lazy. So, Louie and Scrooge clash quite a bit, and it's something that is explicitly talked about often in the show. Now, because Louie is Scrooge's nephew, and living in Scrooge's house, Louie does things like open a can of soda, take a sip, set it aside. The next time he wants to drink soda, he will open a new can and take a fresh sip. And he says he does this because when you open the soda can, it's at peak carbonation, and he only wants that first sip. So this highlights exactly what I was talking about earlier. Scrooge knows the value of $1. He's not cheap, he's just not wasteful. And then, of course, whenever Louis tries to get his own money, what he goes in for are get-rich-quick schemes. Scrooge, on the other hand, has a well-known backstory. He made his first scraps of money working as a shoe shine. And then, when he made enough money, he came to America and bought a gold mine. And then he made his fortune by mining the gold himself. This all shows how hard-working Scrooge is. So, you see, Huey's neuroses highlights Scrooge's confidence. Dewey's recklessness highlights Scrooge's responsibleness. And Louis's laziness highlights Scrooge's willingness to work hard. It's really just the best show. The whole point of this video is that you should all be watching DuckTales. Now, here's Death to explain stock characters.
Thank you, ridiculous pirate character. Stock characters are easily identifiable character types. Think stormtroopers, or any given occupation where the character is just there for the major characters to interact with. Kirsner and Mandel offer the kindly old priest, the tough young bully, the ruthless business executive, and the reckless adventurer as examples. They are predictable, flat characters. It sounds bad, but it's not. If the priest isn't an important character to your story, if you just need him to do your main character a charitable favor, then you don't need to know more than that about him. Unless the priest is your main character. That leads to a very predictable story. You can have a major character that is a kindly old priest, but they have to be rounded out. We need to know more about them than the fact that they are kind, old, and a priest. Now, here is a ridiculous cowboy character to explain caricatures. Oh, I get it. You're using yourself as an example of the things you're talking about. That's actually kind of clever. Now we go live to Ricochet Rick. Wait, what am I supposed to represent?
Thank you, old friend. Caricatures are another type of flat character. They are dominated by a single trait. They got nothing going on, but that one thing they do, or are, could be a physical trait or a behavioral trait. Kirsner and Mandel give miserliness as an example, and nearsightedness. For some reason, the example that comes to my mind is a nerdy character with allergies. It was somebody who appeared a lot in the cartoons I watched as a kid. Hey, back to you, Gus.
Gracias, Ricochet. As mentioned before, these are all relative terms. Whether or not a character is good or bad is really about the degree to which it is necessary for a character to fall into one category or another. We want to consider character motivations. Here I am going to read from Kirsner and Mandel. Because round characters are complex, they are not always easy to understand. They may act unpredictably, just as real people do. They wrestle with decisions, resist or succumb to temptation, make mistakes, ask questions, search for answers, hope and dream, rejoice and despair. What is important is not whether we approve of a character's actions, but whether those actions are plausible. Whether the actions make sense in light of what we know about the character. We need to understand a character's motivation, the reasons behind his or her behavior, or we will not believe or accept that behavior. Of course, when readers get to know a character, they still are not able to predict how a complex, round character will behave in a given situation. Only a flat character is predictable. The tension that develops as readers wait to see how a character will act or react, and thus how a story's conflict will be resolved, is what holds readers' interests and keeps them involved in a story's action as it unfolds. As always, we have a checklist here to help you tease out information about characters from a story. You do not have to worry about everything it says right now. A version will be posted on Canvas, and in the description of this video. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in class.
And by the way, these are pellet guns. I'm not running around waving actual firearms at the screen. Pellets that go in this little clip here.